Hey there, Eli, coming at you again in front of the invert system at OSA Coventry. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about hermit crabs, which are a overlooked member of the cleanup crew a lot of times in your reef aquarium. I do have a whole bunch of different types of hermit crabs in stock at the moment. Generally, we only get a couple different types in, but right now I probably have 5 or 6, so I figured it was a fitting time to do a video on that subject. I have everything at the moment from really tiny little blue leg crabs to these beautiful big blue knuckle hermits. Got some lovely Halloween hermit crabs up top and a few different other species in between. Now, sometimes hermit crabs get a bad rap in the reef aquarium community for a handful of different reasons. So there are so many different species of hermit crabs, and if you are not selective in which type you stock your aquarium with, you can run into some issues with those crabs down the line. A good rule of thumb is sometimes your larger hermit crabs, anything that gets to a decent size, is not the most likely to be reef safe, and especially if you can notice that those claws or those legs have a hairy appearance. Oftentimes, in general, with invertebrates, with different crabs, whether they are a hermit crab or not, hairy legs are almost a surefire sign that these animals are not reef safe. However, if you do play your cards right, a lot of times you can end up with appropriate hermit crabs for your reef aquarium. And if you do have an aquarium that may not be reef centered, but does have saltwater inverts and fish, a lot of times there are still hermit crab options that are a lovely cleanup crew addition to help clean up pesky algae and make sure that uneaten food goes eating. So some of the benefits of hermit crabs, like I just mentioned, a lot of hermit crabs are really good at eating filamentous algae. So whether you have hair algae or filamentous diatoms, a lot of times these crabs are really good at picking in the nooks and crannies in your rockwork and pulling these algae out. And as long as they do have a steady supply of algae, they are going to steadily pick away at those food sources. But most hermit crabs are omnivores, so not only are they going to eat that algae, they will eat frozen food, they will eat pellets that hit the tank. So anything that goes uneaten by your reef tank inhabitants or your saltwater aquarium inhabitants in general, these guys are usually going to make sure that anything that hits the bottom is dealt with. So if you do have a tank that's maybe on the lower side of stocking density, or you do just feed very frequently or large feedings and you know that you're prone to overfeeding the tank, adding some hermit crabs to that aquarium is a great way to make sure that food is not just decaying on the bottom of the tank and you're not getting pockets of detritus in your rockwork because of uneaten food or anything of that effect. So hermit crabs are a great way, especially if you're going with some of your smaller species, to make sure that those holes and nooks and crannies in the rockwork and in between and underneath your coral frags are being cleaned adequately, and you can add a good number of hermit crabs in order to do so. Now, there are a couple of rules of thumb with hermit crabs that I personally like to stand by, and that is generally, again, like I just mentioned, anything really big is not always reef safe. Things like Halloween hermits are usually a good option, regardless of the size that they get. Same with the blue knuckles, but a lot of times, if these go too long without being fed, they may tend to prey upon some of your snails that are in your reef tank. So larger turbo snails and some of your other large snails like conchs might end up as prey items if these hermit crabs run out of food. So making sure you do not overdo the number of hermit crabs in your aquarium is an important way to make sure that your cleanup crew in general stays intact. Same thing with some of your smaller species. Usually blue leg hermit crabs are one of the most affordable options, and they're a really good utilitarian hermit. They do eat cyanobacteria, they do eat hair algae, and they stay relatively small, so they're a great addition if you're trying to make your rocks stay nice and clean. However, in the wild, blue leg hermits do also prey upon cerith snails. So say you have a good colony of cerith snails in your aquarium, it's probably worthwhile steering clear of blue leg hermits because there's a very high likelihood that these animals might prey upon those cerith snails, and it is more worthwhile probably to avoid those hermits for that reason. Generally, the type of hermit that we have the best success with here at OSA is the scarlet reef hermit. This is a Caribbean species of hermit crab that seems to be a little bit more selective with its diet. They generally will leave corals alone. It's not terribly often that you do see hermit crabs that will pick at corals, but sometimes you do, especially some of the more omnivorous species. Your brown legs and anything with hairy legs tends to be a little less selective with their diet, but the scarlet reef hermits are a really good option if you're trying to play your cards right and make sure that your inverts don't get eaten and that your corals don't get messed with down the road. And they reach a respectable size, about 1.5 inches in length usually. So they are a medium or smaller size hermit crab, and they generally do not take over the tank as with some of your other options. However, any of your hermits do run the risk of predation on your inverts, whether that be other hermits or snails in the aquarium. Totally worth mentioning too, the shells that hermit crabs carry on their back are not created by those animals. Almost always, these hermit crabs are going to be living in some sort of snail shell, and as these hermits molt, they will come out of their shell to molt, and if they do need extra space, they will hunt down extra seashells. So oftentimes you do need to have a decent number of larger empty seashells in the bottom of the tank for these hermit crabs to move in over time, and it's something that is not worth being alarmed over if you notice that one leaves its shell, because it's most likely just becoming a little bit larger and will find its own suitable shell down the road. In the case that you don't have a good number of empty snail shells in the bottom of your aquarium for these hermits to move into as they grow, they are a little more prone to preying upon other hermits or other snails for those empty shells, and they will try to secure their own shells in that manner. So if you do want to make sure that you are starting off on the right foot and avoiding as much predation as possible, it's definitely important to make sure that you have some empty shells in the tank for those hermits to move into. Generally, just depending on species of hermit, your empty shells can range from smaller seraph and nacerius shells all the way up to larger turbo and conch shells, just depending on what species you end up going with. But generally, having a good assortment in the tank or leaving empty snail shells in there as your snails naturally reach the end of their life period is a great way to make sure that you always have an appropriate number of shells for these animals to move into. So overall, hermit crabs are a lovely addition to just about any saltwater aquarium. It is always worth being cautious, and it's always worth thinking ahead when you are adding hermit crabs. Be mindful not to overstock the tank with hermit crabs if you want to keep your snail populations intact, and also always making sure that you're offering enough food in the tank, the correct types of food, and offering homes for these hermit crabs to move into in the form of empty shells is a great way to make sure that they behave a little bit better in your aquarium, and you have a little bit more enjoyment of having these animals in the tank. But oftentimes, as long as you plan ahead, hermit crabs are a lovely addition to just about any saltwater aquarium. As always, thank you all for tuning in. Feel free, if you have questions, comments, suggestions, to leave them in the comment section below. And as always, keep on reefing.